you. I'm interested in conversations, policies, actions, and solutions that center the needs and experiences of young people and educators in the city of Boston, in an agenda that is less about politics and more about building an inclusive and beloved community in which children, young people, families, and communities thrive. Mayor Wu is taking on this most important work, all while experiencing backlash and navigating what often goes unnamed. Being a woman leader of color, an Asian American woman leader specifically, with the expectation to navigate everything perfectly and solve historic, systemic, and structural injustices and challenges that have plagued the city of Boston for far too long. I, along with you, gladly anticipate this town hall as Mayor Wu reflects on the past 100 days while shedding light on what's to come. I will now hand it back to Milton. Thank you again for being here.
And thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you for your words and for your sponsorship and introducing Michelle Wu, Your Honor. Hi there.
Hey, Milton, and thank you, Jocelyn. I'm okay. It's been a busy day already.
Yeah, I know. We're going to get into that, but thank you for joining us. You know, I was thinking, I first started covering your work as a policymaker a few years ago, when you were city council president, really pushing your agenda. And here you are now, 100 days, just over 100 days into mayor. So congratulations to you and the work you're trying to do. Thank you for your time today. I want to ask just really quickly, it's 100 days, just over 100 days in. Is there one that really sticks out for you? That one that really kind of, you really look back on?
One particular day?
Yeah, a good day.
A good day. Well, changes it. No, I think, you know, what I love most about city government and what I repeat incessantly at all of our cabinet meetings, et cetera, is that you really have the potential to do big things by getting the small things right. And so in some ways, you know, the quote that Ghislaine mentioned also embodies so much of what we're trying to do, which is that it's impossible to choose what the one biggest thing or the one most important issue is in our residents' lives. We really have to try to tackle root causes and the ways that the issues are interconnected all at once with everything that we've got. And so what I'm proudest of is just that even over only 100 days, a little over 100 days now, we're already starting to see a shift in what Boston believes is possible. So just today, I was on a very packed 23 bus, the Route 23 bus with Mayor Janey, with Congresswoman Presley, and with a whole range of community residents, including the president of Roxbury Community College, Jackie Jenkins Scott, as well as two of our students who attend RCC. And you can see, you know, in the conversations, in the day-to-day, you know, just talking to people and where they were headed in that very moment on a crowded bus at about 11:30 in the morning, a little, you know, seemingly a little act of changing one bus route or then 3 bus routes has already started to feed and nourish the entirety of people's lives and just making it a little bit easier to piece together everything that you need. So whether it's on the buses or some of the work that's happening on Mass and Cass around supportive housing and integrating services and recovery, to some of our climate work and housing in general, I'm excited at how fast we've been able to move things and how much we've been able to shift what's possible.
It's got to be more than flicking a switch, though. Is there anything challenging that really sticks out that you maybe didn't anticipate when you were running for office? So, you know, I think for better or worse, this has felt very familiar because I've been in City Hall for a long time, right? I remember the first days sitting on this very floor, the 5th floor here, where the mayor's office is located, just a couple doors down, working for Mayor Menino. And I've seen the departments and been at countless budget hearings and in community meetings all across our city. And so I think for me, it's less so a challenge of, okay, I didn't realize that this was going to be hard, or I didn't realize we'd have to do this or that, but more really seeing how important it is to invest in our workforce as well. It's been a lot of transition in City Hall, right? I am the 3rd, by the time I stepped into office, I was the 3rd mayor in just 1 year. And
We have had a lot of transitions, whether it's in the school department, in the police department. And so really digging in, and what I try to do in every single part of my job is to not just push for strong policy, push for responsive city services and meeting our residents where they are, but to really highlight and lift the curtain a little bit about the many, many thousands of amazing city workers who are part of all that happens. In our effort in Mass and Cass, for example, every single department was involved in some way, and the level of coordination that it took to ensure that we were finally tackling root causes and bringing about a different approach and a more systemic approach really involved breaking down a lot of the silos that had existed, or the sort of gaps in how we internally were communicating. And so both that external focus on how do we keep up with the urgency of our communities, but also an internal look at how do we really make City Hall and city government the best possible place to work anywhere, right? A healthy, supportive career pathway and pipelines for professional development. That's really critical to the success of our city as well.
The 100 days is the benchmark, I guess, the milestone in a sense. But where do you feel now? Are you settling into a pace? Are you still out the gate? How comfortable? It's a new role. It's not, city council president, you're mayor. And how do you feel, kind of, where do you frame where you are?
I think another wrinkle is that COVID has made it feel very different, sometimes even week to week in this job, especially where we were stepping in mid-November, and just a couple of weeks later, really starting to see the Omicron surge take off at a higher intensity and speed than we had any of the previous surges of COVID. And so in some ways, we're 100 days in, familiar with the routines and continuing to build out our team, but we're also just now getting to the point where community can come back in person together safely for larger events, right? We had our very first parade as a city in 2 years, just this past weekend for St. Patrick's Day. And as we start to see kind of the routines that we've been used to from a couple years back of the block parties or cultural celebrations or public meetings come back in person, I think I'm shifting my schedule. I'm trying to really make sure that I can be present and matching how the city needs to heal coming out of the pandemic as well.
And just around the corner, you have your first city budget. So what's the new administration budget going to look like?
Yeah, we have spent hours and hours already in discussion internally. We've also spent a good amount of time out in community in partnership with the city council. So one piece that I was really excited about was getting the chance to in some ways invert the order of our budget process, right? As you've covered, Milton, for many years, you know that oftentimes the administration writes the budget, it gets presented to the city council in early April. The council starts hearings in late April all the way through June. The public weighs in, but by the time the budget's already been presented, the dollars are largely allocated, and you see some small tweaks here and there, but it's really hard to make major changes at that point. And so we really wanted to start with community feedback. We conducted 4 public town halls, unfortunately during the Omicron surge over Zoom, but city councilors hosted the listening sessions to hear directly from residents what the priorities were, so those could inform our very first version of the budget. It is still a tighter fiscal year. We are still seeing the impacts of the pandemic and having to use some of the federal funds to plug holes, but we are creating space to use some of it for transformational change as well, and to try to put the down payment and make the investments in places that in the years to come, as the economy starts to come back, as city revenues start to come back, that we'll really be able to build on it very quickly then. Do
you have a focus area with those federal funds, or you're just city funds in general, a concentration?
There's a couple places. The bulk of I'm hoping that, again, the city council is our partner, and now in this budget year, a direct collaborator on this with our new charter changes and the council having a co-equal role in crafting the budget. So all of this is subject to my colleagues and those conversations. But what we hope to present is a package that will include housing as the foundation for our recovery. It is the #1 issue on people's minds. It is really what determines whether people can afford to live and thrive in our city. And so the bulk of our ARPA funds will go towards housing stability, whether that's creating more affordable housing or boosting home ownership to close the racial wealth gap, or working to reimagine what we could do with some of our city-owned parcels as well in creating a redevelopment that includes housing attached to that. We're also trying to make major investments in transportation, as we saw earlier, a chunk of this already going to pilot 3 free bus routes for 2 full years, and also going to put forward the other kind of infrastructure investments, like in mental health, which is such an epidemic, intensified during the COVID pandemic, in the arts, and in the many ways in which our economy needs to have gaps closed that existed long before COVID, but that the pandemic has certainly exacerbated.
How about police reform? As a city councilor, this is something you really focused on, and we know it's a different environment being in the mayor's position. What can we see in when it comes to police reform and some of the things you've discussed in the past?
Yeah, so there have been many processes happening in parallel at the same time alongside our budget process, where police reform was very much a part of that public conversation. We have also been moving forward with our search for the new permanent police commissioner. And I'm very grateful to Commissioner Long and many stakeholders in our community who have helped shape and guide that, especially to our search committee, 5 community leaders who have been hearing intensively from just a general town halls with anyone who wanted to sign up to testify, but also in smaller stakeholder sessions as well. For example, with police officers, with the unions, with young people, with other leaders from various community organizations. And so we are settling on a search firm in that process now, and that will really accelerate where we go from here. But as part of all of these processes, we need to set not just the leadership structure and the organizational structure, but a vision for where we're headed with those new leaders in place. It is clear that Boston is a city that is in some ways different from our peer cities, because we have been seeing our statistics when it comes to public safety improve, right? When many cities across the country have been experiencing an increase in incidents of crime and violence, Boston has, through our community partnerships and through investments in not only public safety, but public health and housing stability and community engagement, seen those numbers come down even as our city is growing, and even in a very difficult time in the pandemic. So we want to keep that momentum going, accelerate it. And much of the way that I see reform and what I hear from community is that we're currently not even looking from the right frame, right? If you just think about public safety as police, we're already falling short of delivering for our residents. It has to be seen as an entire ecosystem between public safety, public health, and building community trust. And that will certainly guide each of the candidates we're talking to for police commissioner in the weeks to come.
Thank you. And let's make a jump here, if we could, to you've had a lot of strong opposition to your COVID policies, essentially the Vax passport, and you know, for restaurants and businesses, and also the vaccination requirement for employees, which you're still pursuing. There's been a lot of pushback. We've heard it out there. Given what we know about the virus and where we're headed and where we've been, can you tell us a little bit about the thought process on the decision to move ahead with those restrictions?
We are in a really divided, intense political moment. And we often can learn from history in that how things have gone in the past can mesh very closely, and we have to take those lessons. We know from the pandemic in 1918, a century ago at this point, that we've had very similar patterns, right? A spike towards the fall of year 1, a little bit of subsiding in the summer, another surge. And then by year 3 of that pandemic, people were sick of the policies. They didn't want to be told what to do. Everyone was wanting to move on, just it's over, isn't it? It's been enough months and years of having to think about this. And then there was another surge. And so already, we're watching the wastewater data very carefully. Having that technology and the ability to monitor COVID levels within our wastewater system has been incredibly helpful, and is the most accurate way that we're able to look ahead a little bit in the COVID numbers. And so those levels are showing us a little bit of an uptick right now. We're waiting to see if it kind of plateaus at that level, or if it's up and down, or if it's something more concerning. But more variants continue to develop. We know the best possible way to protect each and every person, to protect our larger communities, to make sure there's capacity within our hospital system, is to boost vaccination rates. So our policies, since they've been announced, even with opposition, have been very successful in getting the city's workforce up to a 95% plus vaccination rate, right? That is compared for a group of 19,000 city workers, that is a huge accomplishment. And we want to keep that going. We have requirements now in place that any new employee for the city of Boston must be vaccinated as well. So that gap will continue to shrink. We need to see those gaps closed as well when it comes to our school system and our young people in particular. There are very, very large vaccination gaps, particularly for Black and Brown families and young people within our school system. And as we head into a period where the numbers are going well, weather is warm, people can be outside and not indoors where there's higher potential for transmission, by all means, we're going to make sure that we revitalize our city, have events, build community, but it's not over. And what I hope we are shifting in the public's understanding and communication with city government is that we've been really trying to emphasize what metrics we're looking at. So everyone understands how we are each playing a role in driving these numbers, and that when numbers are looking good, we can lift the protections, that we can move towards sort of life with, seeming like life without the pandemic. But as the numbers creep up, potentially next fall, going into the winter, we likely will have to add back some protections. It won't need to be an emergency every time after this, but as long as we are watching the numbers carefully and creating more of a system so the community understands where we are in the surge or coming out of surge, we're approaching surge system. That's how I hope there's some more predictability, so it doesn't just feel like everyone's being pulled, lurching from surge to surge.
One of our reader questions on that note centered on the idea of COVID rapid testing, PCR testing. Could we see more of that? What can we see from the city, I guess, in light of some cutbacks, and not cutbacks, but restrictions on federal funding, with not getting all the funding you would like, or you tell me, will we see that kind of testing and PCR and rapid testing kind of accompany the work, potential restrictions in the fall if we get there?
Yeah, testing continues to be a really important part of how we are monitoring the numbers and the experience in our communities, and particularly the disparities and gaps within various parts of our communities. We've also learned a lot from the types of testing and how to stand up a testing site and when it might be needed. And so each bit we're drawing on lessons for the future, so that now we know what it takes to successfully open up a testing site in a very rapid time, and to have that be sustainable during the surge. We are continuing to test students in our and school communities in our school system, because that's where we see the greatest vaccination gaps, and that'll be a continued part of the strategy moving forward as well.
So moving forward, speaking of move forward, you mentioned the police commissioner. You're also searching for a new school superintendent. I just remember days after the election, you were telling me you did not want to replace the superintendent, given the turnover, but here we are. Can you talk a little bit about what happened there and where we go, what the status of that is?
Yeah, I've been involved in BPS for a long time. I have 2 boys in BPS right now, so our schools are the first thing that I think about on a daily basis, as I'm trying to make sure that we can get everyone together and fed and dressed and out the door. And And I've been involved before that, raising my younger sister as her legal guardian through middle school and high school. So I've seen firsthand throughout our district, visiting with school leaders and school communities, just how much hard work and commitment and dedication to serving our students there is in every single one of our school buildings. I also see the many ways in which we fall short of serving all of our students. And we have an opportunity right now. I know it's difficult with one more transition and one more bit of change in what feels like a several year stretch of many changes. But this is one of the most exciting places to be for public education anywhere in the country. We are a city surrounded by resources. I will do whatever it takes to ensure that our school system has the support and resources and political backing that is needed to get us to our full potential. And that means broadening it so it's not just the job of our teachers or our superintendent or our leadership team in BPS, but really ensuring that young people are our citywide mission across every level of government, across every institution. That is what I pledged as a BPS mom in running this city. And I'm really excited for where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. I want to get into a reader question from Sharon. What are the mayor's comments regarding an elected school committee? I think the city council's been talking about this. We've talked about it for years. What's your position?
Yeah, I have seen, again, for a long time, the many ways where it often feels like our families' voices, our decision-making isn't lining up with the urgency or the solutions that are already being carried out at the school level, at the classroom level. And so this is one example where I think we do need to see a wide range of changes implemented across the district, and really centering student, family, and school community voice is central to that. I don't support a fully elected school committee. I believe that we need mayoral accountability for the system, and that right now, again, with the transitions that are ongoing, having the ability to ensure representation and ensure that the political backing of City Hall is fully behind the needs of the superintendent and the school committee. That is my position on the matter. The city council is in the process of having hearings and engaging with the public, and so this is a multiple decision makers and community members are part of shaping this, and so we'll see where that legislative process goes. But I don't support a fully elected school committee, because I do believe we need that accountability directly to the mayor.
Yeah, and to get to the ground level, I know you've talked a lot and really focused, even before being there, on bringing equity to the schools. And this is the work of our sponsor, the Nella May Education Foundation. We had to read a question on this exactly. What kind of work have you been there, seen that needs to be done as far as equity in the school system specifically?
I think there's all different lenses of how we approach that question. And I always start from the perspective of what our families are experiencing. The reality is that there's a sort of general understanding that we don't have enough quality seats for everyone in our school district, especially at the high school level. And part of that is shifting the narrative, because there's some amazing work happening in our schools, and we need to celebrate and lift up that work. And part of that is really ensuring that, the school assignment system that we have now, which has been changed over time, and the city has worked and the school committee has worked to try to ensure a more equitable allocation of different types of seats. But the bottom line is that as a parent or as a caregiver to children, you just need to know that the city you live in is going to be a city where you don't have to think twice about whether you can find a school that you're proud of for your child. That is one of the most important things when you have kids, and that needs to be true for every single person. And so we need to create predictable pathways from early ed all the way through high school. We've launched a new Office of Early Childhood because there aren't enough seats to begin with through our school lotteries, to be able to access through our school lotteries for those early education pre-K seats. And then our grade configurations are still quite complex, so that it can be pretty jarring to have to navigate how you get from point A when you start in the system all the way through to high school at the end. And so in terms of resources going to our different schools, in terms of offering multilingual, multicultural education, of really centering our students with disabilities and our English language learners, these issues have been raised year after year, and they're a central part of how we deliver equity for our families. And then there's equity when it comes to our workforce and our educators. Boston's teacher diversity numbers are not where they need to be. And that is both in the recruitment and how we are attracting and encouraging new teachers to join this pipeline and work, be part of this district, but also in the retention of our educators of color in particular. And so from all angles, school to school, educators and workforce, and from the family's perspective and students' perspective, this has to be our guiding star of how we build a school district that meets our potential, is an anti-racist, equitable, nurturing school system that everybody is proud of.
We've seen reports of the state education department looking again, though, conducting a review of schools. There's always that threat of receivership hovering over the school system. You've pushed back against it. Can you kind of reflect on kind of what your thoughts are there?
So this morning, actually, I was out in Malden. I rarely leave Boston, but used my passport. We went to Malden to join chair of the education committee on the city council, Councilor Mejia, and community members and leaders at the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education's meeting earlier today, to just reiterate that in this moment, from my perspective, we need all the partnership we can get when it comes to investing in and putting resources towards our schools. There is a review that is launching of Boston's progress since the last audit of our district, which was released the same day that our school system went remote for the first time in 2020, in March of 2020, 2 years ago. And so this review will be a follow-up just to understand how conditions have changed and what progress has been made or is still needed over these years of the pandemic. And so as a parent, I welcome the accountability and the additional specificity. We also are in the midst of our transition and need that partnership and need to just stay focused on how we continue delivering for our young people through the end of the school year with the transition to a new superintendent starting next fall.
If we could shift again here, I want to talk about Mass and Cass, which I've been paying close attention to. Can you give a status of things? The encampments are gone. There are a lot of people there, though. A lot of open air drug dealing. Can you address where things are at and where they go from here?
Yeah, there has been an incredible amount of work and coordination between many city agencies, between our partners at the state and county level as well, with funding from the federal government. Also, one of Congresswoman Presley's line items, which really delivered funding to make our housing plan possible. Just to review for anyone who might have not have been, well, you should probably just read Milton's articles to get the full scope of it. But essentially, for a period of 6 or 7 years, the city of Boston experienced a growing opiate crisis centered near Mass Ave and Melnia Cass Boulevard, and the closure of the Long Island Bridge and the services on Long Island, which is a city-owned island that had been home to the largest concentration of emergency overnight shelter in the region, as well as recovery programs directed towards opiate use and substance use in general. The closure of that in 2014 meant that more and more people in need of services were gathering in this part of the city. And by spring of last year, summer of last year, tents had begun to really proliferate in the area as people were needing shelter and needing to create that for themselves. By this past summer, at one point there were, I think the estimate was almost 300 tents in the area, New Market Square, as well as on Atkinson Street. And our approach was that we needed to do something different. The city had been pouring resources in. Most neighborhoods have trash pickup once a week in this area of the city. Street sweepers have been going through daily and then multiple times a day. Our needle pickup services were working so hard, and employees were going and responding to reports of needles found as quickly as possible. But with all those resources and all that additional funding and energy and effort going into it, at the start of every new day, it was back to square one in terms of the dynamic. And so to tackle root causes, we really wanted to, one, connect with each person individually there, and two, introduce changes that would be truly transformational. A survey was conducted in early December. There were a little under 150 people there. Our teams, led by the Boston Public Health Commission and Dr. Monica Burrell, Dr. Solo Ojukutu, and our housing team led by Chief Sheila Dillon, really ensured that the city was building trust with each of the residents of the encampments, and then identifying the needs that needed to be met. We created more than 150 units of low threshold supportive housing, because the reality is that there had been shelter beds available, but people did not feel comfortable going into them, either because their belongings wouldn't be secured or because in active substance use, their needs couldn't be met with various restrictions on entering shelter and what you could bring in with you or how many times you could go out and come back in. And so we sought to truly provide the type of housing and services that people and treatment that people needed. These 150, actually, we're currently serving about 178 individuals in 6 locations across the city. They have seen at each location an incredible uptake of services, just an exponential ability to keep appointments, to see improvement, and many individuals have actually moved on into permanent housing already. The plan now is, as the weather warms up, people are still looking for places to be during the day and what to do outside of appointments and services and having a place to sleep at night. And so we are working on a medium and long-term plan, exploring the possibility of putting more services back on Long Island and working with our community providers and partners in every part of the city. The team has had more than, I think, about 15 specific stakeholder listening sessions to understand what's needed at this point for a long-term plan. And we're working on getting that in place to then try to find the funding to make it happen.
Is Long Island realistic? And also I wanted to ask, speaking of that, Massancast has become that destination. We've written quite a bit about that. How do you undo that kind of what Massancast has become? A lot of people say you can provide housing, people will still go back to that area. How do you undo what has become a Massancast? And is Long Island a realistic part of that?
We really need to decentralize services. A large part of the dynamic has been that when the bridge was shut down and when the services were relocated from the island, the shelter, the temporary shelter, at first was meant to be temporary, was created right in that very area near Boston Medical Center. And our engagement center is there, and there are multiple methadone clinics in the area as well. And so people need to be, if they are to meet their medical needs and healthcare needs, they need to be going to that area. And so, and for shelter to be accessing that area as well. And so we really need to see access to services and housing all across the state, all across the region. And Boston is trying to do our part by showing that it makes a big difference in people's lives when you can start with supportive, low threshold housing that's connected to services.
I want to speak about housing, also development as well. The BPDA, I know you've talked about kind of remaking that, blowing it up, I think, has been put out there. Where do things stand? Do you have a planning head? What happens to the staff that's there? What's your vision now that you've settled in for a bit with the BPDA?
Yeah, there is a continued focus on making sure that we can really put in place the deep reforms to our development, zoning, and planning processes to take into account the interconnected needs that we have as a city. When we have a system that is focused on just the short term of each proposal that comes before the city, based off of a zoning code that hasn't been comprehensively changed since 1960, holistically changed since 1965, that means that everything happens through exception. Every exception requires a particular board or government entity to sign off on it. And it leads to a mishmash of what we see in our neighborhoods and the loss of opportunity to really see development deliver the resources for more affordability, more climate resiliency, and more transportation access. That is the goal of getting our system oriented in that direction, with ultimately a new zoning code, with planning that comes first before development. We are making headway on our chief of planning search and thinking about the ways in which the new leader of a cabinet level position and that new leader will be able to both address the immediate pipeline of projects that are already in the queue and need immediate feedback, as well as that longer term change of how we change the structures and systems. Already before the city council, we have started to sunset the BPDA's urban renewal authorities, which were really from some of the early 1950s and 60s legal mechanisms that enabled the West End to be demolished and many other large swaths of the city to be seized for urban redevelopment. And so we're working to change those structures, change the ways in which we interact with our residents, and then invite in leadership that will be able to tie all those pieces together.
Yeah. And development doesn't stop, but all eyes are watching. Do you have a time frame of this, or just kind of like when do you see things really kind of coming together as the overall plan?
Yeah, the several searches that are underway are, for example, with school superintendent and with police commissioner, there's a more formal search process and search committees. Those are both intended to culminate in June, where it's a tight time frame, but we're working there. The chief of planning, fingers crossed, is moving along and should be well before that.
Great. And we're coming out of time. We couldn't get to all the reader questions, but I think we covered a range of issues, including ones that our readers and viewers did address. I did want to ask generally, though, we're talking 100 days. That's that milestone. What I've always asked mayors this: what's the legacy going to be? What's the next 1,000 days, I guess, under Mayor Wu?
So I actually keep a countdown on my phone. So it is, hold on, let me get the right. I have a couple countdowns going at the same time. 1,380 days left in the term, and each one of them has to count. I think, what I say to all city staff, what I say out in the community, there's kind of three angles by which I want our administration to make our mark. One, as I mentioned earlier, is that city government can do big things, but we have to get the small things right. And that's our special power, is doing the big and the small. Two is to get City Hall out of City Hall into our neighborhoods, really meet people where they are, and design all of our programs and services to meet residents exactly where they need. And three is to embrace the possibility of Boston and of our city government to do things boldly and to shift what we think is possible in our city. I want the legacy of our administration to be lifting up young people, making it the true citywide mission across all parts of Boston, and leaving in place a different type of connection between our community and city government. This is your government. This is your building. These are your dollars. This is our moment and our chance as a city to really grab hold of that brightest future that's ahead of us. Every change that we're making is intended to set the foundation for generations to come and to address the many ways in which our issues are interconnected, our communities are interconnected. And so we need residents leading and driving that from the center of our decision making.
That's great. And I look forward to conversations like these going forward, but I always appreciate your time. I do want to say really quickly, hearing back from Ghislaine from the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. She's standing by, but I want to say thank you as always, and congratulations on the milestone so far.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you. What a powerful conversation. Mayor Wu, thank you for your specific brand of leadership. Your assignment is in no way easy. And so many eyes are on you because of who you are, because of the socio-political climate we are in, and so much more. And it's evident that you are a leader for the people, and your approach to policies, to practices, to services is about ecosystem change and support. Just listening to you talk about pushing for strong policies, tackling root causes, ensuring better services and experiences for residents, breaking down silos, modeling meaningful community engagement, addressing the racial wealth gap and housing instability, thinking about short and long-term solutions, and so much more. I'm exhausted just listening to all of what you've done in 100 days, and look forward to more. I personally thank you for your commitment to quality and equitable public education, and your commitment to justice and to centering the experiences and needs of young people, families, and educators in the city of Boston, especially for all of those who are often marginalized, rendered invisible, and under-resourced. Grace Lee Boggs' wise words echo in my spirit as I listen to you. And she said, you don't choose the times you live in, but you do choose who you want to be, and you do choose how you think. As I listen, I couldn't help but think about how you are choosing to be the kind of leader who is redefining how we each view and approach our individual and collective humanities. We are rooting for you and are so honored to be in the work and to be in community with you. And to everyone present here, thank you for joining us. Thank you.